So I saw this particular joke all over the internet when I was looking for an appropriate piece of humor to open up this sermon, and unfortunately it's not very appropriate, but I thought I would share it anyway because it's everywhere. It's the only one I could find. So this woman answered her door one day and saw a little boy holding up a list. It said, "Ma'am, I'm on a scavenger hunt, and I still need 3 grains of wheat, a pork chop bone, and a piece of used carbon paper to earn $1. "Wow," the woman replied. "Who sent you on such a challenging hunt?" "My babysitter's boyfriend," said the little boy. Sorry. You ever been on a scavenger hunt? They're kind of fun. Now I guess that's sort of old school because, as I've mentioned the last few weeks, the in thing to do now is this new Pokemon game that people play on their smartphones. And this is the game that has thousands of millennials just going out and scouring the neighborhood, seeking to spot one of the many Pokemon characters from their childhood. And I read just the other day that someone had actually found all of them. He was the first one, and most of the ones he found were in the New York, New Jersey area, but he got scholarships to go in different parts of the world looking for these things, and he finally found all of them. So I thought I didn't even know you could do such a thing. But unfortunately, some of these people got a little distracted. There was this Arizona couple, to give just one example. They are facing charges of child endangerment and child neglect because they left their 2-year-old son at home while they went out to play Pokemon Go, and the little boy got outside in 95-degree weather temperature until a neighbor was, able to rescue the child. But they're in trouble for that. So watch your kids. But even before there were scavenger hunts and Pokemon Go, there were treasure hunts. Do you remember treasure hunts? So that's what we're going to do this morning. So again, take care of your kids, as you go on a treasure hunt with me this morning. Now, last week I spoke about greed, and I was a little negative about it. Sorry. So I might sound like I'm contradicting myself this morning by talking about a treasure hunt. But let me be clear about something from the start. I'm not talking about the kind of treasure hunt that pirates lay in bed at night thinking about. I'm not talking about the kind of treasure hunt that excites those who scour backyards and playgrounds with metal detectors. And I'm not talking about following a rainbow to find a pot of gold either. I'm talking about the kind of treasure hunt that our faith inspires and demands. Now, before we begin, let's talk about that word treasure. It's kind of interesting. The origin of the word treasure is interesting. A few hundred years ago, this word, we don't know how, but it replaced the old English word gold hoard. It's one word, gold, H-O-R-D. And of course, this is where we get our word hoard, H-O-A-R-D. It came from gold hoard, which is a long time ago. Therefore, the two words, treasure and hoard, even though they don't sound anything alike, they are historically related to one another. And of course, today, one of those words, treasure, has a mostly positive image. When we think of the word treasure, it gives good vibes. But the other word, hoard, doesn't have a very good image. But these two word siblings have the same parent, gold hoard, although they have grown up and they've gone in two different directions. Have you ever known any siblings like that? They kind of go off in their own thing. So let's go on a treasure hunt. But what should we treasure? And what I'm going to do briefly is take us through our 3 readings this morning and glean from the biblical writers what they are suggesting should be the goal of our spiritual treasure hunts. The first one is from the book of Isaiah. And here the writer in chapter 1 begins by telling his readers that their treasure hunts are leading them to the wrong place. In his mind, that was the temple in Jerusalem. because all they seem to care about, says Isaiah, is animal sacrifices in the temple and other religious activities. But Isaiah claims, this is right at the beginning of his book, he claims that God is not impressed with all this trampling in the temple courtyard. He even claims that the people have blood on their hands, and by that he means more than just the animal sacrifices. They have blood on their hands, but they don't mind going to the temple and doing all that religious stuff. So what does this imply about the people in that day and their treasure hunts? Well, very simple. They were on a treasure hunt for God's forgiveness, mercy, compassion, and justice for themselves. And in their religious system, all of this was found primarily in the temple in Jerusalem, which was the center of religious life in ancient Israel. Now, God's forgiveness, mercy, compassion, and justice, these are things that are certainly worth hunting for. But a problem occurs when the entire goal of one's religion is to find these things only for ourselves. And this is an age-old problem in all of the world's religions, not just ours, but all of them. We are notoriously self-centered. When it comes to religion, we are self-focused only. So we go on these treasure hunts, these spiritual treasure hunts, primarily for ourselves. Again, we are self-centered rather than other-centered, which is what Isaiah is criticizing at the very beginning of his book. He's trying to push his readers to treasure others as well, especially those who need a little extra treasuring. He said, rescue the oppressed, defend the orphan, and plead for the widow, because those are the most vulnerable people of that day. So when we go on our own spiritual treasure hunts, we should always be hunting on behalf of others, even as we hunt on behalf of ourselves. So that's goal number one. Goal number one. The second goal of our spiritual treasure hunts is summed up in one simple word, and that is faith. We find this treasure in our reading from the letter to the Hebrews in the New Testament. Faith is not necessarily something that we can hoard. You can't just pile it up like it's a pile of newspapers. And yet it is something that we can hunt and we can seek, much like a buried treasure. And that's kind of an appropriate thing to say, because that's where faith is. It's buried deep down within us. So that's where we're looking on the inside. Faith is not easily definable, although the writer of the letter to the Hebrews did manage to come up with what is probably the most well-known definition of faith in all of religion. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Notice the key words in that definition: assurance, hope, and conviction. These are not bad things to hunt for, are they? In spiritual terms, these things will fill up our treasure chest rather quickly. So then the writer of Hebrews, in an interesting way, goes on his or her own treasure hunt, looking back through the biblical record, looking back through their tradition to find examples of such faith. And good examples are not hard to find, especially when it comes to Abraham, the father of our faith. And most of you know the story of Abraham, or at least parts of it. Abraham set out on his own treasure hunt for land he was to receive as an inheritance from God. And it turns out, if you read all the Abrahamic stories, it turns out that Abraham treasured three things in his life. He treasured his faith, he treasured this land that he had been promised, and he treasured something that he had not yet attained to his satisfaction, which was descendants. He treasured descendants. So the lesson we can learn from Abraham is simple. We could do worse spending our entire lives on a treasure hunt for faith exploring where that might take us. It won't take us to the end of rainbows, but it will give our lives more meaning and more purpose. And then finally we come to Jesus. What was his treasure hunt all about? Well, first, it's easy to see what he did not treasure, because in our reading today, he tells his followers to sell their possessions. Well, right there we know he is not a materialistic person. Jesus was not a hoarder to any degree. In fact, when you think about it, he likely died with no possessions whatsoever, not even the clothes that he had been wearing, which were stripped from his body. He did not treasure material things, but he did treasure people. I think we can say that he was always on a treasure hunt for people who had eyes to see and ears to hear. He was always searching for a receptive audience. This is where his heart was. Twice, Jesus uses the word treasure in our gospel reading today. And the first one reads this way: "Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys." Jesus was a master of language. He is speaking both literally and metaphorically at the same time. This is what, this has a double meaning when he says this. So literally, he is literally celebrating the art of making your own stuff, like purses and clothing, which is a sign of not being materialistic, right? I mean, think about it. In that day, there were no Walmarts, there were no shopping centers and malls. People couldn't just go buy all their stuff. They had to make all their stuff. And I think we all understand that for Christmas and birthdays and times like that where we might receive gifts, don't we enjoy handmade personal gifts more than things that people bought for us? Of course we do. Especially as we grow older, we recognize there's more value in that. So literally, Jesus is saying, hey, make your own stuff, because that stuff has more value. But he's also speaking metaphorically. He is suggesting that we should treasure things that are more permanent and lasting, things that truly make a difference in the world. And then Jesus famously says, and this is the line that inspired my thinking this morning. He said, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." I think what he's saying here is that as we continue on our spiritual treasure hunts, first of all, these are the words that need to be imprinted in our minds at all times. Maybe you ought to put it on your steering wheel, right? So you can read it all the time. This is important. Jesus is telling us to follow our hearts. However, he's also saying, make sure your heart is in the right place. Because if you got a bad heart, don't follow it, right? Make sure it's in the right place, then follow your heart. And that's going to be your treasure. So what do we treasure? Where are our spiritual treasure hunts taking us? Last week, Annie and I were driving through Kentucky. We were helping one of our children move, so I had to take my pickup, and it's just a lot of work. But we noticed, I'm okay. We noticed that the world's largest yard sale, which is the Highway 127 yard sale. Have any of you ever been to that? You're kind of far off from it here. It was about to begin, okay? We were lucky that we got there before it began, because when you turn off and you go from Interstate 64 to Danville, Kentucky, which is where our destination was, that's Highway 127. And there were people setting up all along the highway. Well, today is the last day for that giant yard sale, which runs all the way from Michigan to Alabama. Think about that. There have been thousands and thousands of people stopping along this large stretch of highway, sorting through boxes and bins and clothing racks and tables, no doubt looking for that one special item that has been eluding them their entire lives. And to think the treasure they might find was someone else's trash. Well, as we leave here today, on our own treasure hunts, let's make sure that we're searching for a treasure and not trash. Let us continue to search for God's forgiveness, mercy, compassion, and justice. Let us continue our quest for faith, assurance, hope, and conviction. And more importantly, let us learn to treasure others as much as we treasure ourselves. Amen.